Hi, everybody. Welcome again. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Lancy Downs. I'm a senior policy analyst here at New America, which is the nonprofit, nonpartisan research org that runs PIA, or the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. We are here today to talk about state-level approaches to youth apprenticeship, and we've got three awesome panelists who you'll be hearing from in a second. I'm just going to start by sort of sharing with you our run of show for today. So we'll do a very, very quick welcome, which is already happening. And then I'm going to talk to you very quickly to do a little bit of context setting for the conversation today. This conversation is based on a report that New America published last year, and so I'll just provide a little bit of background on that to make sure we're all on the same page going into this conversation. And then we will hear about the impact of those state definitions of youth apprenticeship from our three wonderful panelists. We have Denise Miller, Director of Apprenticeship Colorado, Matthew Spinella, who's the Director of Workforce Partnerships and Experiences at the Tennessee Department of Education, and we have Laz Lopez, who is the chair of the Illinois Community College Board and associate superintendent of District 214 right outside of Chicago. And then we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So feel free to pop your questions in the chat as we are talking and presenting. We might not get to them until the end, but my colleague Ivy Sullivan will be noting them and making sure I see them when the time comes. So very quickly, hopefully, I think a lot of you are familiar with PIA, or the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. I see some familiar names in the list of participants, but just very quickly for anybody who's unfamiliar, PIA is a multi-partner national initiative that works to expand access to equitable, high-quality youth apprenticeship programs across the country. Our team here at New America, which is where I work, leads the partnership, but it's a really collaborative initiative, and we work with our 7 national partners, or 8 national partners, I guess, who are listed on the left, to run the initiative and create PIA's programming and publications. So we do not do this alone. Okay, and with that, I'm going to jump into some context setting here. So, okay, so if you've been to a PIA webinar before, a PIA event, or even if you've just been like in apprenticeship world, youth apprenticeship world for a while, you've probably heard these sorts of phrases. There's no federal definition of youth apprenticeship. There's a patchwork of state definitions of youth apprenticeship. You might have even met a colleague from another state at a conference and learned that the way they think about and talk about and define youth apprenticeship in their state is really different from how it works in your state. And so if you are like us and you've encountered this, you may have thought about, so okay, there are all these definitions, but like, what do they actually say? How different are they from one another? My state doesn't have a definition of youth apprenticeship. Like, how do we fit into all of this? And then like, why do these definitions matter at all? And so PIA was curious about all of these questions, and last year we published a report trying to find some answers. This is the report, and let me just pop the link into the chat quickly so folks can reference it if they would like. That's the report now in the chat. We basically found that state definitions of youth apprenticeship fall into one of 3 categories. So category 1 is where youth apprenticeship is not defined at all. There's no state definition of youth apprenticeship. This is the case in about 20 states, and as we will discuss very soon, this does not mean youth apprenticeship is not happening in this state. It just means that there's no official state definition for the term. The second category we found was that youth apprenticeship is defined as a registered apprenticeship. So my shorthand nomenclature here is YA equals RA. In these states, and it was about 30 of them, youth apprenticeships have to meet the same standards as a registered apprenticeship program. Sometimes these states require youth apprenticeship to meet some additional parameters that traditional adult registered apprenticeship doesn't have to meet. Usually those are aimed at addressing youth-specific needs. But in general, these definitions are sort of using the same foundational program model of registered apprenticeship. Like they're all sort of operating from the same baseline program. And then the third definition we found was where a youth apprenticeship is defined as a distinct program model from registered apprenticeship. So youth apprenticeship does not equal registered apprenticeship in these states. There are 11 of them. And unlike in category 2, where you're sort of all operating from the same RA model, and the YA does not equal RA states, there's a lot of variation in the specificity and design of these definitions. Some of them are really clear. They'll lay out like that number of, on the job training hours, related instruction hours, and some of them do not say anything about that at all. And then just for any nerds out there, there are actually 2 states that fall into both category 2 and 3 because they have 2 different defined apprenticeship models for youth. And those states are Alaska and Maryland. So here's what this all looks like on a map, just to help you visualize what's going on. Again, just to reiterate these categories, the gray states are the ones where there's no state definition of youth apprenticeship. Again, does not mean youth apprenticeship is not happening here. Purple states are where YA equals RA. So youth apprenticeship meets the same standards as registered apprenticeship. Dark green are those 11 states where youth apprenticeship is defined as distinct from a RAP. And then you can see in yellow, Maryland and Alaska, which have 2 defined models of youth apprenticeship. If you click on the link in the chat, this map is in that report. You can sort of hover over or click on each state and you'll see the definition, where it was sourced from, and what it says for each state that has a definition. And so while there's a lot more I could say about what we found in this research and some of the nuances, complexities, trends, all that jazz, I actually want to talk to you quickly about what the research didn't cover. So our research didn't address some sort of big questions. We didn't really, it was really focused pretty much entirely on the definitions themselves, what they said, where they lived. It was really like kind of just narrowly focused on that. It did not discuss at all what was happening programmatically in each state. It didn't discuss how the definitions we found impact what happens on the ground, what they mean for program and state leaders trying to implement youth apprenticeship. We didn't discuss how definitions impact the development and operation of programs, how they shape, state systems, state infrastructure. And we didn't get too much into the pros and cons of different definitions and the benefits or drawbacks different states have seen from their approaches. So there is use to the research. It's not that it doesn't do anything, but it didn't cover these 3 things. And so our goal for today is to get to dive into that a little bit and to answer some of the questions our research didn't address. And we're going to do that with our panelists from 3 different states, 1 from each of the categories. So as I mentioned earlier, we have Denise Miller from Colorado, which is representing the no definition of YA states. We have Matthew Spinella from Tennessee, representing YA equals RA. And then last but not least, we have Laz Lopez from Illinois, representing the YA does not equal RA state or definition option. So with that, I think I'm done with my context setting, and I'll invite our panelists to come off mute and we can dive into our discussion. So Denise, I'm going to start with you because you are our no definition of YA representative. And I'm sure lots of folks on the call are aware that there's a ton of youth apprenticeship activity happening in Colorado. The state has been really, really supportive of apprenticeship in general and youth apprenticeship specifically, and has done a lot to expand and strengthen youth apprenticeship. But you don't have a definition of youth apprenticeship. So can you tell us why that is?
Thanks so much, Lancy, and thanks for hosting today. I do want to call out that we participated in a PIA cohort last year. And so that was an activity that included CareerWise, which is an intermediary in our state, myself, who is representative of Apprenticeship Colorado, which is our state registration agency, the governor's office, and then our career technical education partner. And we got into this topic and really geeked out about, do we want a youth apprenticeship definition? And ultimately, one of the things that we were talking about is, to what end do we want to define it? And so we were thinking about each of our stakeholders. And first, there's the business, and why are they looking to start an apprenticeship or recruit, period. And so really they're thinking about, I want to train and hire. And are they thinking, I want to start a program, or are they thinking about, I want to fill a vacancy, I want to get a person, and maybe that happens to be a younger talent pool, maybe it doesn't. So that was one stakeholder we were considering. Then we have the young person and their families. They're thinking about, I want to prepare for my future career. And does that mean they want to participate specifically in a designed apprenticeship program? And what does that look like? Or what does that look like for their training? Then we have the school that's trying to create a high quality work-based learning opportunity and engage their education. And then as the state, we're constantly trying to think, how do we invest in education and improve our training? And so when we thought about all these stakeholders, we had a lot of overlap in their goals, but we also were thinking about all the ways that young people connect to apprenticeship. And it wasn't necessarily in one model. It was a lot of different models. And it wasn't all within a self-contained apprenticeship. In some cases, it was outreach and hiring to apprenticeship. And we had a lot of CTE alignment. We had a lot of different goals. And we started thinking, okay, we don't want to give a prescriptive answer to any of our stakeholders at this point, because we can't say definitively what this should look like to our businesses or our districts. And we actually don't want to alienate or remove the innovation that we're already seeing at the local level on how young people can connect to apprenticeship, because we've seen already, when we do overlay a more prescriptive model, it actually ends up reducing participation. And so that was one of the things that we really dove into, was what are the intents of all these different stakeholders, and then what are the outcomes that we want to see for each of them.
Awesome. Thank you. I was particularly interested in having you join us because I knew that you'd done the Policy Academy and had a really thoughtful discussion about why not to have a definition. It wasn't just sort of like a continuation of the status quo, but something that was given a lot of thought. So thank you for sort of mapping that out for the audience. Matthew, I'd like to turn to you next. So our scan found that Tennessee joins the majority of states in defining youth apprenticeship as registered apprenticeship. Can you tell us why Tennessee chose to adopt that definition of youth apprenticeship?
Yes, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very pleased to join, and it's an honor. So wonderful things to learn from all. Now in Tennessee, we put a tremendous emphasis on aligning priorities across our state agencies and their respective boards. The Tennessee State Workforce Development Board has had operational working groups in response to the governor's workforce vision for many years. And the state apprenticeship director and I have led the apprenticeship work-based learning working group ever since it was formed. And in 2021, our working group was tasked with establishing a common language around apprenticeships and work-based learning in general. And at the time, the apprenticeship director in Tennessee and I both figured, to eliminate confusion and ensure consistency in how we speak, our working group decided that whenever someone refers to the term apprenticeship, We want to mean registered apprenticeship again for that elimination of confusing, ensuring uniformity, etc. And then when someone uses the term youth, because we have some terms already defined in WIOA, we then said, okay, logically, our logic model was to conclude that a youth apprenticeship would be defined as any registered apprenticeship program that allows individuals age 16 and older to participate as an apprentice. So we're just taking already agreed upon terminology across the state and in some cases nationally for what registered apprenticeship is, not to conflate an internship, other work-based learning experience that does not contain the components of an apprenticeship or any other training program, let's just call it that, with those registered apprenticeship programs. And then likewise for the term youth, we wanted to apply that same consistent logic. That definition was published in 2021, again, in response to a task set forth by the State Workforce Board. It was presented to the Operations Committee at the Tennessee Workforce Board and has remained in print on the Tennessee Department of Education website ever since. I will add, though, there are new commissioners in both the Tennessee Department of Education and the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, as well as a new state apprenticeship director in the state of Tennessee. Having said that, because the definition lives with the agency on an agency website, these definitions are always subject to revision, refinement, and change. And having that definition live with the agency does allow for that flexibility and fluidity as needed. So I don't know if I kind of went too far in the left field, not for you, but that's kind of the logic behind it and how we got here.
No, that's great. And you sort of teased our next question, which is after we get to lots, which will be about sort of where definitions live. And yes, thank you for sort of walking us through that. It's interesting to sort of compare and contrast everyone's different approaches to coming up with definitions, and interesting to see that yours was really, there was a lot of thought about clarity and consistency and using language that would make sense for all different stakeholders and agencies. Laz, turning to you now, you are representing the youth apprenticeship defined as distinct from registered apprenticeship cohort. Can you please, first of all, talk to us a little bit about how Illinois' definition of youth apprenticeship differs from the registered apprenticeship definition and criteria? And then after that, can you sort of walk us through sort of the reasoning behind this, how it came to be, why Illinois decided this was the approach for them?
Sure, Lindsay. I do feel like I want to provide just a little bit of context since
Yeah.
everybody went through that, so I'll try to be brief. The work that I led was part of the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board. I led the apprenticeship working group where we did this work back in 2021. And I put a link for everyone in the chat to our definition, which people can check it out, and the framework. Our goal in creating the definition wasn't necessarily to not align with the regular registered apprenticeship definition. It was in part one of the unique differences between us and the other two states on the panel is we are a federal part of the federal system, not our own state. And so there were a lot of barriers to us expanding and getting approvals for registered apprenticeships. Part of our effort to define youth apprenticeships was one, to define this specific group of individuals that are 16 years and older that do not have a high school diploma. So primarily targeting students that are in high school or they're in a GED program of some kind of high school equivalency program, and creating a minimum standard of what quality looks like. And we utilize the PIAS framework and the national work with ACTE in order to design that framework. The biggest barrier to expanding those youth apprenticeships for students that are still high school, part of a high school program, was really the number of hours. And we began with registered apprenticeships through a competency-based approach. I think most people here who are in this space know that there was this move to try to limit that and to create minimum number of 2,000 hours, even though hybrid and competency-based programs are allowed. there was a lot of pushback by federal agency in Illinois to not supporting that. And so we defined it in order for us, as part of our broader context of expanding work-based learning overall in the state, uh, to have apprenticeships as part of sort of that portfolio of opportunities for high school age youth that are paid and on the job. So the biggest distinction isn't that any of the core components of a registered apprenticeship. The distinction really allowing for less than 2,000 hours through a competency-based approach. And creating sort of a standard so that we knew as they were growing that the quality was there.
Yes, thank you for pointing out the SAA versus OA distinction here. I just put the link to the DOL website in the chat, which has the map of which states are which. Denise and Matthew in Colorado and Tennessee are both from SAA, State Apprenticeship Agency states, and Laws in Illinois is from an OA state, which is so not deputized by the federal government versus deputized by the federal government. And Laws, the other thing I just wanted to highlight about Illinois' definition that I think touches on your point about, the registered apprenticeship requirements are often hard to, it's hard to get them to work to serve youth who are in school and still, trying to do all the things high schoolers are trying to do. The Illinois definition calls out both, it doesn't require it, but it recommends like dual credit, that part of the related instruction include dual credit opportunities. And I think if I recall correctly, there's also a call out for disabled students and making sure that youth apprenticeship is a program that can work for students sort of regardless of whether they have a disability or not. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that, but I just, those are two notable elements of your definition, I think.
Yes, I mean, yeah, and I don't know that I would add anything more than, I mean, we have the same related technical instruction. It's with our local community college partners or other higher ed or trade programs. Specifically, our biggest challenge was these hours. It is very difficult for a high school student to complete 2,500 hours. Basing them on competency base, it makes it more feasible, but all the rest of the requirements with the employers are the same. And in essence, the other piece that this has allowed us to do, and our schools in many respects are serving, and we are an example of that locally, is us serving as the intermediary in order to facilitate all of this.
Okay, well, I'm going to stick with you for just a second longer because I want to talk about something that we found in our research, which was about where the definitions live, which is to say like where they're housed. So in some states, the definition is codified in state statute and state regulations. In some states, Matthew alluded to the fact that Tennessee's is on the Tennessee Department of Education website. Illinois is in the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary. And so, depending on where definitions live, it can have different impacts. It can, Matthew alluded to the fact that because theirs isn't codified in state law, there's a little bit more flexibility to change it. So, Laz, just to kick things off with you on this question, how did Illinois leaders decide that the Career Pathways Dictionary was where you wanted this definition to live? And has there been any conversation about codifying the definition in state law or regulations, someplace more sort of formal, perhaps, than the Pathways Dictionary? Not that it's not a good place, just.
So the Pathways Dictionary didn't exist except, but probably I can't remember when we started it, 5-6 years ago. And it came to be not only around apprenticeships, but all of the things related to career pathways in the state of Illinois. And so we brought all of our state agencies together, my agency, the Community College Board, the Board of Higher Ed, State Board of Education, Department of Commerce, like all of our groups came together so that we can all speak the same language. That is how that was born. And it certainly has been powerful. I would say the framework also lives on our part of our iWib, on our WorkNet website. We have a new working group that's meeting now where one of the recommendations is looking at codifying these definitions into law. And that's how sort of it ended up there. Very much in part because of it was a new space. And to some extent, it still is new.
Sorry, lost my unmute button. Matthew, you alluded in your opening comments to some of the benefits and drawbacks of having the Tennessee definition live in on the Department of Education website. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see as sort of the pros and cons of having it live there rather than in state law or somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the positives, as I mentioned earlier, and you had just highlighted, when our leadership changes, obviously, commissioners change, administrations change, et cetera, our terminology might also change. And over time, there may be a shift in how different programs are implemented, and prioritized. And so having the definition live on an agency website does allow that flexibility in the event that leadership um, has a mind to do so, or if the application of a particular priority changes. Obviously, that allows us to be more agile and pivot way more effectively, or I should say efficiently, than if an amendment to a law needed to be made in policy. If and when a definition for youth apprenticeship is codified into law, obviously the records at the departments and other state agencies will most definitely be updated to reflect the will of the legislation. Now, in terms of one of the biggest drawbacks, and I'm not sure how my other panelists feel about this, but working as a state agency and serving the people, we often have these very fancy, formal websites where we have a lot of information. And sadly, maybe some of those that we serve may not know about or have access to these things. And so we try and diversify the communication channels that we utilize to inform all of our stakeholders. Department of Education is a very LEA, local education agency, school district, public charter school directed or facing website. And so through that collaboration, we really do try to, across agencies, reach out to those that are served by all agencies. But the drawback of it living in one place and maybe not codified into law is that not all people are aware. And so it's really a matter of organically trying to spread the word, get people on board, and then really see how that can impact the workforce system.
Thank you. Really helpful to have you both sort of talk through that because, when we were doing the research initially, we were sort of even wondering whether or not to include things like the question for us is like mapping it out was like, do we include things where the definition isn't codified in state law? And the answer ultimately had to be yes, because so many states have their definition and it's one they use and rely on that exists outside of state law. So thank you both for sharing about that. I want to talk a little bit more about how definitions, or a lack thereof, as the case might be, impact youth apprenticeship in the state. So, Denise, we're going back to you. So I'm curious if you can share a little bit about how not having a definition has impacted the growth and development of youth apprenticeship programs in Colorado. Clearly, there's a lot of good work going on. So I'm just curious if you can talk about that link.
Yeah, so I think I keep struggling with the reaction to the not having a definition. So I think we have on the back end, we analyze 16 to 24 at the Department of Labor because that's our WIOA definition, and we're the registration agency. So that on the back end are obviously looking at registered apprenticeship growth in the 16 to 24 population. I think that where we have some challenges that we discussed both in the cohort prior to the cohort is that in the education partner systems, there were different definitions, different data sets, different programmatic evaluations that were going on because there were different incentive programs for different work-based learning opportunities. And so it was sort of how do we, over time, make sure to build out the systems that align, but in the moment be able to evaluate internally registered apprenticeship growth within the Department of Labor, within the Department of Education, within the college system, and be able to piece that information together for young people. So it's not that we're not evaluating these impacts or defining. It's what is this idea of if we did a state level, it must be 16 to 24, it must be meet these specific criteria. Would it unintentionally alienate certain school districts or certain colleges, community colleges, or certain populations? So I think that that's where we were trying to parse out what information do we actually have to be able to approve, to be able to evaluate at the state level, and be able to track that growth. I think the other big conversation that came up that I wanted to flag was that there's not even resources against every school district. And so if we said, you have to align with CTE in all the key in-demand industries across every school district in Colorado, they might not have the availability of instructors or curriculum or approved CTE programs. And so it might be something that actually creates an inequitable system. And so rather we wanted to spur that demand through the industry engagement. So I just wanted to like flag those distinctions because I think that's something that we are following the registered apprenticeship model and we're evaluating 16 to 24 growth, but we're doing it more on the back end than on a front end criteria.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And yes, thank you for highlighting the fact that no youth apprenticeship definition doesn't mean that registered apprenticeship isn't like defined and has parameters in the state, because it clearly does. And I guess one quick follow-up for you. Do you have any way of tracking like whether in that 16 to 24 range, like when somebody is starting a youth apprenticeship program, like if they're starting at 16, 17, 18 versus, 22, 23, 24, or whether they're starting like in high school or before? I don't know. I'm just curious if you have any sense of a breakdown there.
Yeah, so we became a state apprenticeship agency in 2023. So we're a recent state apprenticeship agency. But Rapids, which is the federal system, we decided to continue using that once we became a state apprenticeship agency. So what we are doing is analyzing the date of enrollment. And so any state that uses Rapids can look at, or if they have that state system, can look at the date of enrollment and see whether it's at 16, 17, 18, whatever that age of entry is in a registered apprenticeship program. Right now, we know that within that 16 to 24 growth, we've seen a 10% increase over that last 10 years of youth participation. In the building and construction trades, there's heavily enrollment at 18. And that is the building and construction trades are increasing their outreach to schools and connection with schools, particularly in like pre-apprenticeship and other types of engagement pre-high school graduation. But because of a lot of limitations in safety, they are looking more to the school districts as a talent pipeline than starting the actual registered apprenticeship program during the high school years.
So thank you. Laws and Matthew, it's essentially the same question for you, but sort of from the perspective of states that do have a youth apprenticeship definition. Is there anything you want to share about how your state's definition has impacted the growth and development of youth apprenticeship programs or systems in your state? Oh, whoever wants to go first can go first. I don't.
All right, I'll jump in
Great.
then. Here's what it really has helped and sort of informed some of our other legislative efforts, particularly for high school age youth, in order to encourage work-based learning overall, as well as inform our post-secondary workforce readiness act and an endorsement framework that we have, where it is asking students to have some real world experiences along with early college credit. And apprenticeship is certainly one way to meet that criteria. So it does create an infrastructure that makes it more accessible for school districts that aren't used to doing this work, is what I would say. Where it really lent itself originally, you needed to have sort of outside people come in and help you do this. It's not work that the districts do. The reality of creating this framework, it makes it more likely that a school district can engage in this work and lead in this work uh, within that context, if that makes sense. And we've seen more school districts and communities across the state, particularly in areas like construction, be able to expand and increase perhaps even pre-apprenticeship programs as well.
And I'll piggyback off of that response. I think that was great. And we are seeing similar things in Tennessee. Just to reiterate and just to emphasize the amount of collaborative work, interagency work that takes place in Tennessee. My office works very closely with both the Office of Apprenticeship as well as workforce compliance. And so much like Laz, who had seen an increase in the youth participating in work-based learning activities in the building construction as well as advanced manufacturing. I mean, that is the bread and butter between ag, healthcare, and then more importantly, or on a larger scale, in industrial maintenance technology, welding technology, machining technology, and skilled trades. In Tennessee, we work with the Workforce Compliance Division to provide assurances to our employers about exemptions from the Child Labor Act that exist at both the federal and state level for youth. And that's really where we have that growth and scaling of not only Tennessee certified pre-apprenticeships, which I'll touch on shortly, but also registered apprenticeships and all work-based learning participation. And we have students that are earning upwards of $20 to $25 per hour at age 16 or 17, when in many cases 10 years ago, businesses would kind of just not even consider the talent source from high schools. But more directly to respond to your questions, I do have a few talking points that I'll share. Employers now have a clear understanding of what qualifies as youth apprenticeship. And with the Apprenticeship Tennessee team in place, they have a number of points of contact, whether you're at a local area, statewide, or even just within a community. They receive specific targeted guidance and assistance on how to implement. They receive support on how to connect with either a K-12 institution, an institution of higher education, or a combination. And it really does deepen that talent pipeline. At the systems level, the Apprenticeship Tennessee team has really done a great job establishing infrastructure in which again, interaction with the state workforce board to codify a definition for what a Tennessee certified pre-apprenticeship is, the characteristics in which it must align with a registered apprenticeship program, must only be offered and connect to a registered apprenticeship program. And through the completion of that program, all completers have an opportunity to interview for full-time employment, specifically with a registered apprenticeship program or similar occupation in that organization. We do not have fly-by-night companies just calling anything and everything a registered apprenticeship program to chase dollars. Rather, we have real partnerships in place where our students, if they are understanding and I guess eligible to participate in a pre-apprenticeship program that's certified by the state, they know that when they complete, they have an opportunity to interview for a job or just get the job offer without the interview because they performed so well, as opposed to just getting perhaps a piece of paper that may or may not carry the same type of meaning as, a real job offer or, progress toward that Rapids apprenticeship certificate. And in our current landscape, the conditions are ideal for innovative pilot programs where we can document the most successful outcomes. And in a perfect world, this would inform future initiatives, potentially policy, but where we have our existing infrastructure and guidance on how a youth can progress with multiple on and off ramps to leverage what they like and what they're good at through a specific training program into registered apprenticeship, whether that's through pre-apprenticeship or youth registered apprenticeship. And we feel that things are very strong. Kind of always want to keep growing though. And I think learning from Illinois and Colorado was really helpful as well.
Thank you. And you just raised something that I have a sort of follow-up question about, but I'm going to ask it now about programs calling themselves apprenticeships that aren't actually apprenticeships. And so Denise, I kind of have this question for you because one thing I wondered about as I was doing the research last fall that I didn't really have time to look into was in states where there isn't a definition of youth apprenticeship, are there ever sort of like branding or messaging challenges of the kind that Matthew alluded to? Like, do you ever encounter programs that call themselves youth apprenticeships, but don't actually look anything like an apprenticeship as we would understand it? And I mean apprenticeship like lowercase a, like it's the students aren't paid or there's no actual like mentor, like like some of the core components of what makes like apprenticeship as an earn and learn opportunity are not there. So I'm curious if that's something you've encountered, and if so, like how you guys have dealt with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have sort of two responses to that. We are heavily promoting and endorsing the value add of registration and registered apprenticeship. I think there's also a limitation at the state level of how far you can go in any type of apprenticeship and sort of stopping or controlling programs that do call themselves something else. Like we have in industry in adult apprenticeship, if you call it that, programs that call themselves an apprenticeship. You could search on Indeed today and find endless programs that call themselves an apprenticeship. So I think it's sort of how do you more so go to a place where you're building high quality programs and partnering effectively with schools than I think going on a quest of trying to get to programs that are, I think, like maybe misbranding themselves or something like that. I think I sort of struggle with how do we catch programs? And then I think if there's school districts that are partnering, it may just be a point of education and how do they know the difference between an internship and an apprenticeship? And we have a number of staff on our team that spend the time to go and educate on work-based learning and high quality work-based learning models. So I think there's sort of a both and I think a few different factors there embedded in the question that I'm sort of trying to wrestle with is what is the role of the state in sort of enforcing marketing problems, I guess. And then also, I think how do we interact and continue to provide high technical assistance to the public?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, you guys aren't necessarily like an enforcement agency for the word apprenticeship. So I understand yeah, the sort of balance there. Laws, I guess I sort of have a similar kind of branding politics of words kind of question for you because your youth apprenticeship in Illinois is distinct from registered apprenticeship. I know that often using the word apprenticeship for something other than registered apprenticeship can be a political issue, and there can be tensions around that. I guess I'm curious if that's something you've experienced or if there's sort of any other pushback to the definition as something that is distinct from registered apprenticeship that you've encountered in Illinois.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. So, and it's because we are an OA state and not a state agency, and because of the perspective of their assessment of how it's being defined. I think part of the way I would answer that is to make the case for why there is value in it being defined differently. And what I will say is the outcome of a 17-year-old or 18-year-old who's just earning their high school diploma in an apprenticeship experience is different from the outcome of a 25-year-old, right? Whereas the only real valuable outcome if you're 25 going through the way the registered apprenticeship is set up is that them having a full-time job at that company at the end of it is the highest and best outcome. But that is not the case if you're 17. So I can give you countless examples of students. I have examples where students, for example, a young lady who did a manufacturing apprenticeship and is working full-time right now and going to a local community college to earn her associates. But I have lots of examples of students. For example, I have countless apprentices, for example, who are doing maybe in manufacturing or in engineering, that at the end of that high school, at the end, their choice is to go to a four-year university to earn a degree in engineering. And they're still maintaining a relationship with that employer, but their outcome wasn't necessarily a full-time job with that employer. Because the goal of high school in today's economic reality is to some extent move the ball further down the field, is to move up that discovery process for students so they can make a better, more informed decision about their future the moment they cross that stage. Because when that happens, the world does change for them. They're considered an adult. Education is no longer free. And they no longer necessarily have the same wraparound services they have with us as a high school student. So I would make the argument in the affirmative of why it's good to have a different definition, because the outcomes could be just as positive, but different than with a registered apprenticeship for students who do not have a high school diploma.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. Thank you for making that argument. Is there any I'm curious if you have any, like, if you're speaking to a state that was weighing whether or not to pursue the Illinois avenue of a definition of youth apprenticeship that was distinct from RA, like, is there anything in particular you would encourage them to think about as they're making those decisions? Like anything they should be aware of before they commit one way or the other?
Yeah, I would say I wish we were a state agency, an office that individuals would apply just like they do. Because I want you to know, we still complete all the same paperwork for a registered apprenticeship. That process, I wanted us to replicate that as a state, so that the state is sort of affirming a youth apprenticeship, just like the federal government is affirming and we do have some registered apprenticeships that we do have RA with some of our youth. They're not exclusive. However, I wanted to emulate that process as a state. And the purpose of that is in order to ensure that there is a quality control in the experiences, and that it's not just a marketing tool, but something real that's happening, that's having a significant impact for the benefit of students.
Awesome. Thank you. Matthew, I'm going to turn it over to you for the last word before we get to some questions. So sort of same idea. If you were talking to a state that was considering formally adopting a definition where youth apprenticeship had to meet the same standards as registered apprenticeship, is there anything you would encourage them to think about as they were deliberating on that choice?
Yeah, I would recommend first doing a little bit of upfront work. I mean, what we've heard from a lot of the panelists, all the great things that are taking place, is there was a good amount of forethought put forth before either determining not to have a definition or to have a definition and how to compose it. And it's that pre-planning that really should be done on the front end before you move forward. Everybody operates under a different set of circumstances. We are an SAA, some states are OA, and even among those that are in the same category, there are different circumstances. A landscape analysis, full landscape analysis to determine is uniformity in your terminology across public and private entities of great priorities? Will that be helpful or not? What are the intended outcomes for those who you serve? What are your overarching goals for the workforce system? It sounds like all three of the states on this panel, and not to pat Tennessee on the back too much, but I feel like Tennessee, Colorado, and Illinois have really done that work. and have arrived at that conclusion. So really do the work up front. And then if you believe that this can be accomplished through aligning youth apprenticeship with registered apprenticeship, that's the opportunity that you should pursue. And then determining the next steps in how you deliver that message is really important as well, which Tennessee we're still working through and continually try to improve.
Do your homework. It's a good teacher suggestion to folks. I appreciate what you highlighted there, because hopefully that's a takeaway people have gotten from this conversation, which is like, you are all in 3 different states, operating in 3 different contexts, who have come essentially to 3 different conclusions about how your state wants to approach youth in apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship. But you've all done it in a way that is you were thinking about how do we ensure strong, equitable outcomes for young people in their school and in career. And I think I hope that people understand that sort of there's no one size fits all, no one right way to do it. It's really going to depend on your state and the context you're operating in. And there are lots of different avenues you can take to get to a definition that is going to be helpful to your young people and promote their academic and career success. So thank you all for making that point so well for us. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second in case there are questions in the chat. Ivy sent over a couple to me that I will ask you now. But folks, if you have questions, we have about 9 more minutes. So anything you want to ask the panelists, now is your chance. Okay, we talked a little bit about state apprenticeship agencies versus Office of Apprenticeships throughout this conversation. I think that's where this question is coming from. So what advice would you give to apprenticeship intermediaries that are not sure how to coordinate or interact with their state agency or Office of Apprenticeship?
I can begin.
Great.
So I've had the unique experience of first being in an OA state because we were an OA state. So that's a federal, I don't want to use jargon. So that's a federally run state. And then we transitioned to an SAA state. And so I think that relationship is actually very, very different to registered apprenticeship. When we were a US Department of Labor run state, it is not necessarily the mandate of the federal agency to coordinate with the entire state system in the way that it is for the local intermediaries. There's a requirement there to give information about the eligible training provider list and the GI Bill benefits. But at the level that when you become a state apprenticeship agency, the need to coordinate with workforce, education, all of your partners, get into the coordination with your intermediaries, shifts entirely in really thinking about what is your state, local, and economic needs. And so I think that whether you're situated in a US Department of Labor run state or an SAA state already sort of makes a big distinction as to how you would approach that. When we were in an OA state, a lot of it was building that relationship, having a warm relationship. We met monthly with our OA director and then looked to figure out what would be a workflow that would coordinate and how do we understand the rules of engagement federally. And it was like, we're working within your system. Now we're in a position where we're really in partnership with all of our intermediaries and really thinking about how do we connect and collaborate with all of our workforce and education partners to change our own system. And so I think that whether if you were an intermediary, again, it's building that relationship, but also kind of communicating what you see on the ground and then what you would like to see for your state. So I think it's like you actually could shift a system when you're in as a stakeholder of youth apprenticeship when you're in an SAA state. So I think there's a huge value add to being in an SAA state personally, but also how you relate to those different types of registration agencies are quite different.
Yeah, I mean, if the Office of Apprenticeship, whether it's OA or SAA, I mean, I think this applies. Tennessee too was previously OA. Being visible, being approachable, being receptive to communication and correspondence from the intermediary can only benefit the job seekers in general. So I think, those are all great things. As I can't say any more than what Denise had said, though. She kind of nailed it. Thank you.
Laz, anything to add as our current OA person? You don't have to.
No, I think the question was focused more of our state, yeah. So I don't know that I have anything to add. Thanks.
I'm going to put this question in the chat to you though, because you are the representative of sort of youth apprenticeship as not necessarily registered apprenticeship. So Matthew and Denise, when they were talking about youth apprenticeship, they were talking about registered apprenticeships that youth are in. When Laws is talking about youth apprenticeship, he's talking about something that's distinct from registered apprenticeship, which is why I'm going to ask him this, which is essentially, are your youth apprenticeship programs connected to registered apprenticeship programs? When somebody in Illinois, student in Illinois, finishes their youth apprenticeship, is there a registered apprenticeship program that they're going into? So are youth apprenticeship programs in Illinois functioning as pre-apprenticeships is essentially what this question is asking.
So what I would say, it depends on the occupation. So for some of the most common areas, like in the trades and in manufacturing, there are so many programs that are targeting adults that students can transition into as well. The target for youth apprenticeships, keep in mind, are really entry level roles. So for ASC, the automotive, or in HVAC, residential, right? They're the entry level roles. And I bring that up because keep in mind, one of the reasons to create a youth apprenticeship definition might be related to funding. And so I am using K-12 funding for all of the related technical instruction. And so that is a benefit to the employers to partnering with us as an intermediary, because their only cost is really the salary costs, if that makes sense. And so in those areas that are common occupations, yes, there are available registered apprenticeships for adults. And some, particularly in the trades, students are transitioning then to the local unions in those areas. But there's occupations that we're delivering that don't have an adult program that may require additional education. So even like in healthcare, when they're completing their CNA and they're working at the local hospital, their goal is to be a nurse or a doctor or a radiologist, whatever those technical fields are that required additional education, in which some cases the employers are going to help fund that, but they're not sort of established apprenticeships in the traditional sense as an RA, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Denise or Matthew, anything you want to talk about in your states as youth and pre-apprenticeships transitioning to registered apprenticeships versus just youth who are doing registered apprenticeships? Just want to give you the floor before we wrap up.
There's a couple of things that are going on in the youth space. I think that there's the stackable model that you're sort of talking about, and that could be where you have either a standalone apprenticeship that then stacks into another apprenticeship, and that's going sequentially to get to different levels of the same occupation. There's the pre-apprenticeship model where it's going into from a pre-apprenticeship to a very specific registered apprenticeship. There's also a sort of design where you have this is an experience that's meant to train you in some form or fashion. And then after this, you could maybe go to college, maybe go to a specific, it's almost a career exploration, but a deeper model sort of designed for that 17 to 18-year-old population. So there's a lot happening. And I feel like even the term as an umbrella youth apprenticeship there's so much because of how many factors go into how a school district and a state chooses to implement in partnership with the business, which is really where we're sort of trying to meet the need to begin with and the student job seeker needs. So there's all of those going on in Colorado. And to get back to your first question, that's why we had trouble defining it.
Full circle. What a way to close it out. Well, we are just at time, so I want to say thanks to the three of you for joining us. This has been a really illuminating and interesting conversation. Thanks to everybody who joined and listened in. I hope it was helpful. We will be sharing the recording and the slides after this. Yeah, stay tuned for more PIA webinars to come the rest of this year. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day, everybody. Bye.